Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. The 2024 F1 season is shaping up to be an absolute banger, and next year looks pretty similar on this current trajectory, but in 2026 everything changes again. The aero regulations and most certainly the engine regulations, they are changing considerably, and rumours are starting to emerge as to which team is potentially going to come out on top. Mercedes, James Allison reckons the feeling in the team is similar to how it was back in 2014 when they created an absolutely dominant machine. If this comes true again, what does it mean for Hamilton's move to Ferrari, but also which team stands to benefit the most, the Mercedes Works team or McLaren, given what they've achieved over the last 18 months? Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. Plenty, of course, to get on with today, starting with the Baku Grand Prix, of course, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku. And it seems that they didn't get the memo here because Logan Sargent, driver number 2, is still appearing on some of the kind of advertising for the weekend's Grand Prix, so, they might need to get that one replaced. Kind of quickly with Franco Colapinto, we'll discuss him in a second. Speaking of drivers in that category, though, the bosses actually do support the idea of Stefano Domenicali in Formula 1 of having this post-season rookie race. You guys might have seen the rumours that they are considering, after Abu Dhabi, having a race in the Formula 1 cars just for rookies. Either, I suppose, rookies that are going to be on the grid next season and have a seat confirmed, or drivers that are academy drivers of those respective teams that are currently racing in Formula 2 or Super Formula or some other series. So Toto Wolff and the other bosses did generally back this because they do want to give their drivers the chance. They're, younger drivers, they're potential rookies, junior drivers in the team. The issue is that it's always disruptive to some degree if you put them in the car. I mean, Antonelli in, George Russell's Mercedes wasn't ideal because he crashed it and then they had to repair it and all these other problems. And of course, Russell was, not happy about that, you'd imagine. Didn't get as much practice in as Hamilton did on the weekend. So, this is just how it tends to go. But the teams are mandated to give up certain sessions for rookies over the course of a year with both of the drivers. And, they don't mind doing that. They obviously have, the opportunity to give the likes of Antonelli testing time in the older Mercedes cars and, Pirelli tyre tests and stuff like this that is done. That's possible for the teams and the younger drivers, the Behrmans, the Lawsons of this world, to step into and do. But, of course, that's not a full process, and the idea of after Abu Dhabi, when all the cars are there anyway, all the drivers are there anyway, to have another race that doesn't disrupt the season at all at the end of it, when the cars are not going to be used anymore anyway, that does make a lot of sense. So, that's a discussion either way, because it means an extra day of preparation and everything, but, this is, as far as Toto's concerned, the best idea so far that they've come up with to actually improve in this aspect. Valls gives his thoughts on Colapinto, who had a very respectable race at the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, ends up P12 in the end. If he didn't make that mistake at the second Lesmo in qualifying, who knows where he could have qualified, because Albon put it P9, didn't he? Got into Q3 anyway. Colapinto might have made Q2, probably would have made Q2 had he not made that error, and then he might have finished even further up the grid. Of course, he benefited to some degree, Colapinto, with the drama ahead, but look, nonetheless, it was a solid drive, and even James Vowell says that that drive validated the choice. Now, I think we need to see a bit more time because Monza is pretty much the easiest track. It's certainly up there. There's not many corners on that one, whereas Baku, that is a different story, right? So if Colapinto performs there and doesn't bin it, then most certainly he will have probably validated their choice. But look, let's be honest, Sargent would probably have binned it on this Baku weekend. So if Colapinto doesn't, that's a success. The funny thing about Colapinto is he's actually a really entertaining character, and I don't, if he performs well this season, I wonder what his future holds really, because he's not going to get a drive at Williams next year. He's probably not going to get a drive anywhere in Formula 1 next year with the way things are currently looking. Of course, they've got Sainz and Albon, right? They're not going to change their idea there. But he does bring some things outside of the sport as well. He's got Argentinian backing, massive fan base, has actual pretty good monetary backing as well from some sponsors that are paying Williams, I think, maybe $4.5 million to have him in addition to the team. But he's been talking also, he's a funny guy. He tweeted this out with this sign being upside down for Franco Colapinto, and then he turned it upside down, and then I think his caption was "Never Stop Dreaming" on Instagram. Then he's spun it upside down, then he put it back the right way, and he's been tweeting a lot of funny stuff. And yesterday yesterday, then he tweeted this out. I wanted to tell you that starting from next Monday, there will be basically a social media manager managing this account. It was fun while it lasted, he says. So lots of people are like, oh no, I can't believe it, right? James Vald is shutting him down. They try to, not let this guy go rogue on social media. And then the next thing he tweets is, I hope you guys didn't actually believe that, because that's never going to happen, right? Like, I'm maintaining control of my socials. So he's an entertaining character, and it's good to have him on the grid from now to the end of the season. And if he proves himself on and also therefore off the track, then we are, hopefully going to have another driver that may well return to the sport at some point in the future. But I guess we'll see where, and if he continues to do a solid job, then that will of course continue to impress Williams. Let's say in some hypothetical world, Albon gets signed to Red Bull again or something, maybe Colapinto's a driver that they consider in that seat. Let's talk though about Red Bull and these other teams. Remarkably enough as it is, Red Bull are not the fastest team this season in terms of average pit stop times. Now, I wonder if you organise this by median, you might get a different result. As in, Red Bull had that bad stop for Max this last weekend with like the 6-second stop, and there's been a couple of kind of stinkers they've had, whereas probably their median time is maybe the fastest. I'm not exactly sure on that, but if you average it as a mean, which I'm pretty sure is what this is, then Ferrari on average have the fastest average stop this season with a 2.59, because they just don't have many slow stops at all, and they're pretty damn consistent. It's interesting, isn't it, that Vasseur leaves Sauber and they completely go to pot with their pit stops, and now he joins Ferrari, and they are now the fastest pit stop team on average, right? So McLaren are there or thereabouts. Mercedes, obviously, they believe, well, they said they've put some investment in to their pit stop equipment and stuff. So, anything under 3 seconds is reasonably okay. Obviously, you want to get as close to like 2.5 on average as you can. There's only a couple of teams, Ferrari and Red Bull, that are really there, but it's still impressive. And Sauber are just atrocious, right? Like, to be fair, this is largely biased upwards by the fact that they had those terrible stops at the start of the season with all the issues that they were suffering with. They have fixed that, but they're still not fast. And, RB are like a second slower even themselves than Ferrari are. So that's not ideal. And in addition to pit stops for the likes of Ferrari, their reliability, especially compared to 2022, has got a whole lot better. And this was a very interesting kind of article that came out on the reliability rate, on whether it's making the sport better or worse. I would have said, and we talked about this on the channel a couple of years ago, certainly during 2023, the dominant reliability of these cars nowadays, that they're so reliable compared to, the 80s, the 70s, the 90s, the early 2000s, whatever, right? The reliability has been getting better and better in Formula 1 for, decades, year on year at this point, and it's pretty common nowadays. Like, it's barely ever happened in F1 history to have every car finish a Grand Prix, and over the last couple of seasons, there's been, a handful of Grand Prix where that has happened with absolutely no mechanical retirements to speak of. It's pretty rare that they even happen nowadays, a mechanical failure during a Grand Prix, which is very rare in Formula 1 history. And is it a good or a bad thing? Because last season, the argument was, Max is winning by 20 seconds, and the chances that his car blows up is basically zero. So it makes it less exciting because you're not going to get that, random mechanical DNF. But I will say, in a proper season, it is probably better that the cars finish the race, if you know what I mean. Like, this season, if the McLaren was unreliable and it was going to blow up, and like Lando, maybe it happens and Lando's car blows up and he loses a race win or something, and if that happens, then, that's super unlucky. But I think that when the season is good, when the battles are close, and when the championship fight is legit, then probably reliability being better is a good thing for the sport. But on the bad seasons, it's better for reliability to be worse, because then it does at least throw some chaos into the mix. I guess that's my take, but I guess you can't really have it both ways. But let's think about which one of these 4 teams, maybe which one of these 5 teams, or maybe even 6 teams, is going to do the best when the regulations change. The 2026 regulations in some ways are rather dramatically different from what they currently are. We know that there are serious changes to the aero rules, the active aerodynamics they're bringing in, the lesser importance of the floor, and they're just substantial changes. Now, we think that these regulations are going to be quite prescriptive. The rule book is probably going to be longer than it ever has been before, and therefore some teams have suggested, well, is it going to be less about the aero because it's so restrictive the teams can't do that much, to separate themselves? Although every time that's ever been said enough on history, the teams always find a way, some teams to gain some degree of performance advantage. But if that's true, at least maybe in part, the big differentiator between the teams will be engine performance, especially given this is the biggest change to the regulations, at least since 2014, with the massive changes to the power unit regulations that are coming in, going from effectively 85-15 to 50-50 ICE to obviously the hybrid engine with the electrical components, and even the components within those parts are largely different as well. So it's going to be a big switch up. Some teams are going to get it right. I'm sure some teams are going to get it horribly wrong. And as it stands, we are gearing towards what looks like a very entertaining championship fight with 4 teams in the mix to win races this season, which has not been the case for a very long time. And on this current path, next year potentially looks like it's going to be similar as well. But in 2026, it's highly, highly unlikely that we will have multiple teams in any sort of championship fight, and it largely will depend on the strength of the engine. 2014 was the most recent example of this, and Mercedes came out the gates with a fast car aerodynamically, don't get it wrong, it was arguably the fastest, but the engine was basically a second a lap quicker on some tracks than any other team. It was a joke, and they had a monster advantage at that point. And Niki Lauda and the team at Mercedes did a good job convincing Lewis Hamilton of this when he joined the team for that season, and potentially Hamilton was getting similar kind of discussions with Ferrari, and they themselves seemingly feel confident about their engine project. Of course, famously Enzo Ferrari's comment on aerodynamics are for those that can't build engines. Ferrari know how to build a fast engine. Their engines might be at times somewhat unreliable, but Ferrari or Mercedes are definitely two of the engine manufacturers that you would back to be the fastest. But Mercedes are talking as if they might potentially be able to repeat what happened in 2014. James Allison, who to be fair wasn't actually with the team at the time, but he says when the new generation of power units were being concocted back in 2014, but those of us in the team who were at the team at the time tell me that the feeling is very similar. So he's pretty much saying that the way that the power unit guys, the engineers are working on this current next generation of cars are feeling is pretty much the same as what they were feeling like back in 2014 when they went on to absolutely dominate the turbo hybrid era. And certainly the first, 3 years, really, of those regulations, they had by far a sizable engine advantage, which diminished over time. And over the last couple of years, they've not had the fastest engine. But, the feeling is that high-performance powertrains, as they call it, are on fire right now. But other teams are going to tell you the same thing. Red Bull won't be as confident, right? They have their own power unit thing now, right? It's no longer Honda. It's Red Bull powertrains. They're partnering with Ford. And Red Bull, if you ask them, they'll tell you, well, we're on track with our targets, but they won't necessarily tell you that we're going to have a rocket ship, which makes sense. And it's also one of the reasons why if you are Max Verstappen and you're seeing the current Red Bull trajectory, and then you're thinking that in 2026, it's very, very unlikely that Red Bull have the fastest engine, I would say, in 2026. They might have a similar performing one, near enough the fastest, but it's very unlikely, I would say, that as their first kind of outing as Red Bull powertrains, they're going to have the fastest engine. And they've not got Newey anymore to make sure that they've got the fastest aerodynamic package. So that is obviously a bit of a concern. The question really is, if this is true, what does it mean for the other teams? And what do other teams think about it themselves? Are Ferrari, let's say Honda, equally confident in their situation? Because, well, Aston Martin are partnering with Honda effectively as a works team for 2026 and beyond. Right now, Honda are pretty much considered to have the strongest power unit. It's felt that way over the last couple of years. Certainly from an ICE perspective, it did seem like Mercedes struggled a bit more when they added an additional component of sustainable fuels and biofuels into the concoction that they're using now in the actual ICEs themselves. It felt like Mercedes struggled a bit with that at the start of 2022 with their engine power they were able to deploy. And from a hybrid perspective, it's been considered now for a few years that Honda probably have the strongest electrical components, and that still seems to be true in terms of deployment and what they're capable of. Yes, Max had some problems actually with that at Monza with his deployment at the end of the main straight, but generally Red Bull on average across the ICE and the electrical components have arguably had the strongest over the last few years with Honda in charge. Honda are no longer with Red Bull, they're going to Aston Martin. Ferrari, they're going to have a strong engine. The question there is, what's the reliability going to be? Certainly in its first season, that's going to be a big question. But I think the other key point for me is that given the way things currently look, is this, let's say Mercedes are very strong, more beneficial to Mercedes or to McLaren? Because McLaren are very much used to the Mercedes engine. They're keeping it for 2026 and beyond. They have that arrangement in place. Then again, it's a brand new engine, so the, shall we say, integration of that engine component into the chassis is, again, presumably going to be easier for Mercedes than it is for McLaren, especially with kind of a brand new set of designs. But obviously there's some experience there, so it should be fine. But it is one of the reasons why it's very rare in Formula One history for a customer team to win a world championship or even really to beat their main team. It's happened a few times. I mean, with Red Bull Renault in like 2010 when Renault were kind of on the grid, but kind of not on the grid. So that was a bit of an interesting one. Brawn is an example. Benetton is an example. There's a couple over the last few decades, teams that have, won by being a customer team, and it's very rare, right? And this is one of the reasons why I was actually rather critical, let's say 18 months ago, of Lando's decision to stay with McLaren, is because I'm not sure I felt that they could be a championship winner. Now they definitely can, and they probably will. Whether their team mentality is quite right to win, both, that's another question. But, they've proven that they can do it, either this year or potentially next year as well. But in 2026, does it, help them? Does it hurt them? What do we think about that? So what are your guys' thoughts in the comment section below? Are Mercedes going to come out the gate absolutely flying? And therefore does, let's say McLaren have a stronger team in terms of putting together an aerodynamic package? Maybe that helps McLaren more than Mercedes, but also does it inspire potentially Verstappen to go and join that team? So, Mark put this together here of 2026 driver standings kind of predictions, right? And first of all, I'm not even sure this is necessarily going to be possible, but maybe it is. But so many drivers have so many points in this one that it feels pretty unlikely that like loads of drivers have this many, but it's possible, right? So first of all, he's predicting Leclerc, Hamilton, Piastri, Russell actually at McLaren, with Verstappen then joining instead of Russell at Mercedes, which would be an interesting timeline. Then he's got Norris and Lawson ending up at a Red Bull, which is pretty fascinating. So, obviously this is just theories, but I thought it was kind of an interesting theory on what might happen. And he's got Alonso topping the times for now. So, I mean, look, we're not going to get a season as good as this in 2026. There's no way. But imagine, right, if we did, and it obviously raises the question, what would happen assuming that, let's say, Honda have a really good power unit as to Mercedes and maybe as to Ferrari, then, what does that mean for the top of the timesheets at the end of the season? But massively intrigued your thoughts in the comment section below. Of course, firstly, we've got to get through the next couple of seasons, and as it stands, it's looking rather good. I mean, even this year, despite the Red Bull domination at the start of the year, there was still the win in Australia for Sainz, there was still the win in Miami for Lando, that have, prevented any team or driver winning 3 in a row, and it's still not happened this year, and certainly as it stands, it does not look like it's going to happen from now to the end of the season. So unpredictable and great to witness. And of course, Baku is coming up a week today. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.